Question is that the motion be agreed to. The Honourable Member for Nelson in reply.
Thank you, Mr President, and thank you to members who made contributions on the motion. I appreciate that and some of the support expressed in those contributions. And it's quite right that we would all turn our mind to consider what's before us in this place in a motion and to be free to ask questions about it, and that's not a problem. And one thing I would note, actually, before I start, is that when I got up, Mr President, to first move this motion, I neglected to acknowledge that just before I did that, we'd had the inaugural speech from the member for Montgomery, which was just wonderful, and we all found it heartfelt, and I would welcome him, thank him for that lovely contribution to our chamber, and we look forward to working as colleagues in this chamber with you. And I apologise that I was so focused on doing something out of the ordinary with moving a motion without notice that I neglected to do it in my opening remarks. Welcome. And, Mr President, I'll also just note that, just for clarity, one of the reasons I did move this as a motion without notice in this place at this time is because in order for something like this to occur and a hearing to occur as part of the process, prior to us considering the order that the government intends to bring to us in the first week of December, which is our understanding, this was the only private members' day available to establish a committee and to take it forward. So I didn't in my opening contribution explain that was part of the timing issue and the need for considering a motion without notice rather than the way we'd normally do it with tabling it and then debating it at another time. And so I'll just address a couple of the things brought up in contributions here just for clarity, I guess, and to put my position on them on the record. First and foremost, I want to make it very clear that my intention here was to find a way for members of this place to be able to engage with the TPC expert panel members on the work that they had done in a way that they would find acceptable and appropriate. And that's purely the function of establishing this committee, because on engaging with them about it, it was clear that it would need to be a formal parliamentary process rather than an informal process of any kind. Now, there's a couple of things about that I want to elaborate on then in response to matters that were raised. Firstly, in relation to Member for Pembroke's concerns about a lack of consistency, perhaps, in the response received, I see it as entirely consistent. In fact, the panel made it clear, and it's in the email that I've tabled, that requests had been made for briefings for either individual members or parties to have briefings from the panel members, and they declined that as an option that was acceptable. And my understanding from the interactions I've had with them is that's very clearly they regard that as a risk of being politicised then. Because in a private briefing, and if you give numerous private briefings, you can't be assured that there's consistency always in the information and the engagements that are being provided, or even equity and fairness in that. So, and then there's always the risk that you might be verbaled afterwards. Things that you may say in a private briefing to a member or a party may then be characterised incorrectly in the public domain. So without wanting to verbal the panel members myself, I'm sharing my understanding of what, to me, looks like entire consistency between the panel members declining to brief a party in private on their work and accepting and identifying and then accepting the idea that they wanted to do it in a formal mechanism to the Parliament. That looks entirely consistent to me. And one of the things that I would say first and foremost as well, because the last thing I want to do is do what the panel, I suspect, feared, and that's to be verbaled in the public domain by others. I think that we've already seen some of that from the government, quite frankly, and others. So what I would suggest is any of these matters that are coming up in this debate that members may feel there's a lack of clarity around, whether it's the motivation of the TPC panel in identifying this mechanism, whether it's the scope of what's been identified that can be discussed and examined in the context of the committee, whether it's consistency or otherwise with responses they provided to others. We could actually explore, if and when this committee is formed from this process, we could potentially then, as a committee, write to the panel and ask for clarification, further information on all of those matters, and they then themselves can explain to us what their view is on those things. So that would be a safe and appropriate way for us to engage with them and get more clarity if, from the result of today's debate, members feel that there's still a lack of clarity around those things. That's what I'd suggest, so we ensure that nobody's being mischaracterised here. Having said that, I'll pick up on the member for Murchison's matters that she raised, which was a question about whether somehow the way things are described in the email I received from Mr John Ramsey mean that the panel will not be able to give more information or won't somehow be able to discuss their work with us because of the way it's phrased. And the part that was quoted from the email was that the panel members wish to make it clear that they would not respond to questions that relate to issues concerning ongoing public or parliamentary discussions in relation to the proposal for a multi-purpose stadium at Macquarie Point, subsequent to the submission of their reports, unless such questions were directly relevant to the matters, the subject of the reports. My understanding of that statement, and again, the committee, should it be formed, will be able to ask for clarification of that statement if it's required before the hearing process. My understanding of that statement is that what they're saying is they can talk about things that they took evidence on, that they considered, that they fed into and that they included in their reports. But things that may have emerged subsequent to their reports being put into the public domain, they will not be commenting on those sorts of matters. An example, and it's one that actively came up in my interactions, actually, and as I rang around each member here to discuss this committee, I raised this example as well. So all of you will be familiar with it if you spoke to me about this committee. For example, we've had material emerge into the public domain subsequent to the TPC reports being put in the public domain in September. One clear example would be the Coordinator General's economic assessments that he put into, charitably, put into an op-ed piece in the Mercury, and there's been much public discussion about that and interactions about that. That's work that emerged after the TPC concluded its work. It's not reflected in its reports. It wasn't taken in evidence by the TPC. So, as an example, if there were questions put about that work to the panel in a hearing process via this committee, I imagine, based on what they've described here in this letter, they would decline to answer questions about that work because it doesn't fit into what they've specified they're prepared to talk about, and quite rightly. If there were questions, however, about the economic assessments and the economic evidence and the methodologies that they used in their reports and reported on, I think that is what they will engage in, according to the way I read this response and this email. So that's just one small example, just to try to illustrate how I understand that. We can certainly, if and when a committee is formed, we can certainly get greater clarification for members ahead of a hearing process if that's required, so that there is no clarity. I also think it will quite likely be a dynamic matter that would be dealt with within the hearing context, and as the member for Murchison also quite rightly pointed out, and I agree, we'll need to be mindful of it as a hearing progresses, if that's where we get to with this. And certainly I don't believe that the panel members would be backward in coming forward to saying if a question was put to them they felt was not appropriate or not within the scope of what they're able to speak about, they would quite rightly and quite likely say that's not something we can comment on. Noting that the chair of that panel is a former Solicitor General, or from the Solicitor General's office in the state, previously Mr Paul Turner. So I think that, yes, we will tread carefully with that matter. We could seek greater clarification around it. What I read in this email in no way precludes them talking fully about their report. I think questioning them about it, eliciting responses from them about what our thoughts are or concerns, or testing other information that's been asserted to us about their report. All of that is additional information that's not available to us right now and not available through any other avenue. It's certainly, I think, wrong to suggest that this hearing process somehow won't have the opportunity to draw out any more information than is already in the public domain. We know full well when we get submissions on things, we can always get more information out of a person when we have a talk with them through a hearing process. And there's a lot of value in it being able to work through and test and talk about and ask questions about material people have included in reports. One of the things that I think is an interesting concern to raise here on this is whether there's fairness and equity here in setting this process up for the TPC panel, and why not others. And first and foremost, in response to that, I would say, as a private member in this place, and as I've spelt out really clearly my motivations for seeking to find a way forward with this, it's not my job to make this fair and equitable in a broader sense if people think there's a lack of fairness and equity. Any member here, if they felt somebody needed to be heard from in a way that's different to the way we're already hearing from them, could have sought to set up a process. It's really clear, Mr. President, that what we have here is not an inquiry into the stadium. This is not to replicate any question, a broader question about the stadium. This is a process purely set up to be able to hear from the panel members from the TPC about their work, because it's the only available mechanism to do that. They've specified it would need to be a parliamentary process. So let's tease that out a tiny bit. Every other stakeholder group has had multiple opportunities to put information forward into the public domain and to discuss it further. And there's all sorts of ways, parliamentary and otherwise, that they've been able to do that. They've been able to do it via a PAC process. I was on PAC when we began an inquiry into the stadium-related matters. Was it 2022 or 2023? It was quite a long time ago, Mr. President. There's been ongoing looking at this broader stadium issue through the PAC for a number of years. Lots of evidence has been brought forward in a parliamentary sense in hearings and submissions through that process, including from the proponent numerous times, the government, other advocates for the stadium, people who are against the stadium, independent experts. All sorts of people have had the opportunity through that PAC process to do that and continue to. In fact, we've had hearings just as recently, I think, as last week on this matter. So PAC, we've had the entire POS process, which was absolutely designed to be the opportunity for all manner of evidence and submissions and materials to be put forward by anyone really who wanted to have a say on it into the POS process. Certainly, the whole POS process is based on the proponent's information and evidence put forward. We've also had here, in a parliamentary sense, questions available in Parliament to be put to the government. The government's been able to answer questions with parliamentary record that we've put to them for years now also. That's ongoing. We've got an estimates process coming up in 2 weeks' time where we will still be able to be putting questions directly to the government and receiving answers in a parliamentary sense on this matter. So first and foremost, Mr. President, it's not my job to make it fair and equitable if that sense of fair and equitable is that somehow we have to give everybody a go. Literally everybody else in the state, apart from the panel members, has had a go and continues to have a go in terms of putting forward their arguments, their material, their evidence. And they've been able to do it through parliamentary mechanisms and through other mechanisms outside Parliament. They've been able to do it through a very favourable media environment. They've been able to do it with the weight of the government behind them. The only group that we have not been able to engage with about their work is the TPC panel members. So it is that looming gap in what we would find valuable and important in our consideration of this matter that I sought to address here. That looming gap of this crucial piece of expert independent advice to the Parliament that I thought and continue to think is important for us to be able to engage with further, understand better, test ideas against, and come out the other end better informed in our vote. So this is select committee being established is purely a mechanism available to us to do that. I don't believe there is any other mechanism that could be delivered to enable us to do it. That's what I sought advice on, obviously, Mr President, and I've arrived at this point because there was literally no other. If we'd used another existing committee, we wouldn't have had the availability of all MLCs to engage in the process who wish to. So we couldn't use an existing committee. If we needed to do somehow a big broader inquiry, we would never have got it done in the time available. Plus, that's beyond what the purpose of this is, which is to hear from the panel. The panel had made it clear, both previously in communications with members or parties, and to me when I put the question to them, that they would not do private briefings or piecemeal briefings. When I said to them, under what circumstances would you speak to us? A parliamentary mechanism was the answer. So when people ask me, what other mechanisms did you consider? I ask them, you tell me which ones fit the bill other than the one I've put on the table today for us to consider. And Mr President, let's be really clear here. If there's a difference in response from the TPC, when an initial question was put to them, could you provide a briefing on your work to members of the upper house, and their answer was not a private briefing in that circumstance. You know, if one group said, oh, what a shame, and walked away, and I said, oh, that's interesting, what could we do then to make it available? What circumstances could be appropriate? Then that might look different then in the response, because I actually sought to find a gate in that wall rather than just accept there was a wall there. So that's the whole point of this motion. I hope I've clarified a few of those matters for members on the record here in summing up. I certainly appreciate that there appears to be support, and I hope that that's true and we're able to form this committee in order to have a single on the record hearing with the TPC panel members prior to our debate on the order. It's for a specific purpose. I do not believe there's a need to consider broadening it, and there's certainly no practical manner under which we could at this point in time. So if members felt something broader was needed, they could have either thought of it themselves at an earlier date, they could have engaged with me when I even spoke about this with them as I was developing this throughout the last week. But I'm sorry, I didn't think of it earlier. Could have been good if we'd had a little bit less of a time constraint over us. I thought of it in the time frame I thought of it in, and I brought it as promptly and as effectively as I could to this place as an opportunity for us. I think it's going to be a beneficial one. So I hope members will support us in that so that we can do our job even better.
Question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it.